October 23, 1942. El Alamein, Egypt. The night air is heavy with heat and dust. Under a moon half swallowed by desert haze, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stands upon the dunes, the wind tugging at his greatcoat. Below him, the dark sea of the Qattara Depression stretches to the south, and ahead, the shallow ridge lines of El Alamein, where the Afrika Korps waits. He listens. The desert is quiet now, but even from this distance he can feel it, the stillness before the storm. The night carries the faint scent of oil and burnt rubber, mingling with the salt air from the distant Mediterranean. Trucks cough in the distance as mechanics work under shrouded lamps muffling their tools. Somewhere behind the ridge, the last of the Panzer III tanks are being refueled, if you can call it that. Most are being rationed with only half their fuel tanks filled. Rommel adjusts his goggles, sand crusted at the corners of his face. His eyes sweep the horizon toward the east where faint flashes, tiny pinpricks of light flicker intermittently. Artillery test fires, British side. He knows what that means. The time has come. Inside the command truck, Major General Fritz Bayerlein pores over a stack of reports under a flickering lantern. The situation is grim. Rommel's forces, once the pride of the Wehrmacht's desert campaign, are now running on fumes, literally. The supply line across the Mediterranean has been strangled. Allied naval and air power, bolstered by ultra-intelligence, intercept nearly every convoy from Italy. Every shell, every drop of fuel is a fight. Rommel steps inside the truck, closing the door behind him. "Status," he demands, his voice steady but low. Bayerlein looks up. Fuel reserves, 30% of requirement. Ammunition, less than half. Some divisions only 2 days' worth. Rommel exhales through his nose. And the infantry? Exhausted, sir. The Italians are holding the southern sector, but morale is fragile. A beat of silence. Outside, the wind howls like an animal. Rommel moves to the map table. A tattered map of the El Alamein line is pinned down with cartridge casings. He runs a finger along the front, north to south from the coast to the impassable Qattara Depression. Montgomery has fortified everything in between. Minefields, barbed wire, anti-tank ditches, 10 miles deep in some places. The British 8th Army, over 200,000 strong, is massed beyond those lines waiting. Montgomery will attack soon, Rommel mutters, half to himself. He has the fuel, the men, the guns. Bayerlein nods grimly. And we have the desert. Rommel looks up sharply. The desert favors those who move fast, Fritz, and we can barely move at all. Outside, a mechanic stumbles past the window, carrying a jerry can that sloshes half empty. The smell of gasoline fills the air, sharp and bitter. Rommel steps back out into the night. He removes his cap, letting the wind whip through his hair. The stars above the desert blaze like cold fires, their light undimmed by civilization. He stares east again. Somewhere beyond those dunes, Bernard Montgomery is preparing the final blow. He thinks of home, of Lucy, his wife, writing letters that he rarely has time to answer. He thinks of the men under his command, the German veterans and weary Italians who have fought alongside him from Tobruk to Gazala. They are tired, starving, many barefoot or without proper uniforms, yet still they hold the line. Then at precisely 9:40 p.m., the first artillery flash lights the horizon. 1, 2, then 1,000. The desert explodes into thunder. A wall of light sweeps across the horizon like dawn breaking from the earth itself. The ground trembles under Rommel's boots as British guns unleash their fury, 900 artillery pieces firing in perfect coordination. Shells scream overhead, bursting in sheets of fire along the Axis lines. Men dive for cover. Radios crackle. The Afrika Korps, Rommel's beloved desert foxes, are buried under a storm of steel. Rommel doesn't flinch. He watches in silence, his jaw tight. So it begins, he says quietly. Montgomery's offensive, in that instant. He knows. The fate of the desert war will be decided here, on these sands. But what he cannot yet see, what no one in that moment can, is how the once unstoppable Afrika Korps will crumble under the weight of hunger, exhaustion, and hopeless odds. The Battle of El Alamein has begun October 23, 1942. 10:00 p.m. The northern sector of the El Alamein line, a low roar rolls through the sand like a living thing. The ground shakes beneath every foot, every wheel, every breath. The sky to the east burns orange and white as British artillery pounds the Axis trenches in unbroken rhythm. For hours it does not stop. Sergeant Hans Witzel of the 21st Panzer Division crouches behind a low ridge, his helmet pressed tight to his head. The air smells of cordite and scorched sand. Around him, men shout orders drowned by the deafening barrage. He clutches his MG-34, its barrel already warm from defensive fire. Each explosion sends a wave of grit washing over him. "Get down! Get down!" Someone screams as a shell lands close, too close. The blast throws sand and shrapnel into the air, raining down in a metallic hiss. When the shelling finally slackens, the night is thick with dust and silence broken only by moans and the crackle of small fires. In the distance, engines rumble. Witzel peers through the haze and sees them. British infantry advancing under cover of creeping fire, bayonets glinting under the moonlight. Behind them, Matilda and Churchill tanks grind forward, massive silhouettes crawling across the dunes. Rommel's defensive lines ignite with return fire. The desert erupts once more in muzzle flashes. 88mm guns roar. Anti-tank crews firing until the barrels glow red. At the command post, Rommel leans over the radio operator's shoulder, listening to fragments of frantic messages. "Enemy armor advancing. Request reinforcements." Ammunition nearly expended. Static cuts in. He grips the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Tell the 15th Panzer. They hold their ground. No retreat." "Yes, Herr Feldmarschall." Outside vehicles roar to life. Trucks and armored cars rush supplies and men forward, weaving through the dunes in total blackout, guided only by instinct and the faint glow of tracer fire. But every gallon of fuel spent now means another tank left dry by morning. Far to the south, the Italian Folgore Parachute Division braces for impact. Their positions, dug deep among the dunes, are now the last line before the Katara Depression. The Italians fight like cornered lions, their 47mm anti-tank guns hopelessly small against British armor. Yet they stay firing until the barrels melt. Rommel's staff officers hunch over maps lit by dim lamps. Bayerlein mutters, "They're hitting us across the entire front. No Schwerpunkt." Montgomery's attacking everywhere at once. Rommel nods grimly. "He's learned from us. He's not giving me a flank to exploit." He steps outside again. The air is thick with the smell of burning fuel. Somewhere nearby, a fuel depot has gone up, sending black smoke spiraling into the night. The desert glows a hellish red, flickering like the inside of a furnace. The field marshal climbs the dunes to get a clearer view. His boots sink into the shifting sand as artillery flashes illuminate his silhouette. All along the line, the British advance continues in waves. He sees the tanks moving in steady formation, disciplined, mechanical, relentless. There's no chaos, no overextension. Montgomery has drilled them for this moment. By midnight, the first defensive trenches are overrun in the northern sector. Rommel orders a counterattack by what remains of the 21st Panzer. 30 tanks move forward, engines coughing, exhaust spewing black smoke. They engage head-on with the British Grants and Shermans under the moonlight. The night turns to a nightmare of fire and steel. The deep thud of 80mm guns answers the high-pitched whine of British 6-pounders. Explosions ripple across the desert floor, lighting twisted hulls and burning men. Radio chatter dissolves into chaos. Coordinates shouted, cut off by static screams or sudden silence. Rommel watches it unfold through his field glasses. "Too many," he mutters. "We're bleeding the last of our strength on ground we can't hold." Bayerlein approaches behind him, his face smeared with dust. "Sir, our fuel is nearly gone. Some of the panzers can't even return to position." Rommel lowers the binoculars slowly. His voice is low, deliberate. "Then they will stay where they are and fight until the guns are silent." He turns his gaze toward the east. The British artillery is firing again, another barrage rolling westward like thunder. For the first time in months, Rommel feels something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Doubt. The desert fox, who had chased the British across North Africa and turned defeat into legend, now stands on the edge of the abyss. He closes his eyes against the glare of the explosions. He can hear his men dying out there, his men trapped in the inferno of El Alamein, and dawn is still hours away. October 24th, 1942, 5:20 a.m. The first light of day creeps across the dunes of El Alamein. The desert looks like the surface of another planet. Charred wrecks, scattered helmets, and the jagged silhouettes of tanks half buried in sand. Smoke drifts low across the ridges, glowing faintly in the rising sun. The air tastes of metal and ash. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel hasn't slept. He stands beside his command car, goggles hanging loose around his neck, uniform gray with dust. His face is lined deeper than before. All night the British have pressed forward, probing attacks, artillery barrages, armor thrusts, and every hour, the Afrika Korps has been forced to yield another strip of ground. Major General Bayerlein approaches with the morning report. Loss is heavy. 15th Panzer, half their tanks gone. 21st, barely operational. Ammunition is low. Fuel almost non-existent. Rommel doesn't reply. He looks east where the flashes of battle continue like a distant storm. Montgomery's not letting go, he murmurs. No, sir, Bayerlein says softly. He means to finish us here. The Field Marshal nods once, slowly. He knows it. Montgomery's plan is precise, methodical. Wear down the Axis lines, crush them with artillery, then exploit the breach with armor. It's the kind of slow-grinding warfare Rommel always despised. But it's working. A radio crackles. Enemy armor breaking through near Kidney Ridge. Request immediate air support. Rommel glances at the sky, empty. The Luftwaffe is gone. What few aircraft remain are grounded by lack of fuel. The British dominate the air now. Every Axis column that moves by day is bombed mercilessly. Tell them to fall back behind the second line, Rommel orders. And for God's sake, save the wounded if they can. As the sun climbs higher, the heat becomes unbearable. The men move sluggishly, their throats parched. Flies swarm over corpses, human and machine alike. The desert stinks of fuel and blood. A column of Italian M1340 tanks passes by, engines sputtering, their thin armor scarred and dented. The crews salute as they pass Rommel's position, their faces hollow, eyes sunken. He returns the salute solemnly. For all the jokes German officers make about Italian units, he knows the truth. They've stood and fought in hellish conditions, often with worse equipment and no hope of relief. At midday, Rommel convenes a briefing under a makeshift tent. Maps are spread across a crate, pinned down by stones and pistol magazines. The situation is dire. The 8th Army is pressing along a wide front, Operation Lightfoot, Montgomery calls it. The goal? Pierce the Axis line between the coast and the Katara Depression, splitting Rommel's forces in two. Colonel Westphal, Chief of Staff, leans forward. If we can hold until nightfall, we might regroup. Maybe counterattack tomorrow. Rommel shakes his head. With what? The tanks are empty. The men are running on willpower alone. No, the time for counterattack has passed. The words hang in the air like smoke. No one speaks. Rommel turns away from the map and looks out across the dunes. The once glorious desert battlefield, his kingdom of maneuver and deception, has turned against him. Every trick that once worked, feints, fast flanking drives, false withdrawals, has been blunted by attrition. The Afrika Korps no longer moves like a fox. It crawls like a wounded beast. In the afternoon, the British intensify their assault. Spitfires and Kitty Hawks scream overhead, strafing supply columns. The 80mm crews fire back, but their barrels are worn smooth. Rommel rides forward in his command car to observe the northern sector. The desert road is littered with the burned-out hulks of half-tracks and staff cars. He passes a group of medics tending to wounded men under a torn tarpaulin. One young soldier, barely 20, grips Rommel's sleeve as he passes. Herr Feldmarschall, are we going home soon? Rommel pauses. For a moment he can't answer. He lays a hand on the boy's shoulder. You'll go home, he says quietly. I promise. He knows it's a lie. By sunset, the Afrika Korps has fallen back 3 miles. The once fluid front line is now a twisted scar across the desert, marked by craters and smoke columns. The radio traffic dwindles to silence as units are wiped out or cut off. That night, Rommel writes in his diary by candlelight. We have reached the limit of endurance. Supplies gone. Men exhausted. The British fight with endless strength. If we do not receive fuel and ammunition soon, our destruction is certain. Outside his tent, the desert wind begins to rise again. Sand drifts against the canvas walls like the whisper of ghosts. Rommel closes his eyes, feeling the grit on his skin. He thinks of the long road from Tripoli to Tobruk, of victories won against impossible odds. He thinks of how close they came to Cairo, to the Suez, to changing the war itself. And now, all of it slipping away, grain by grain. As he drifts into a shallow, uneasy sleep, a distant explosion shakes the earth. Somewhere in the dark, another piece of the Afrika Korps dies. October 25, 1942, 06 hours. The Axis front line west of Kidney Ridge. The desert dawn arrives blood red. The wind carries the smell of cordite and something worse, burning flesh. Crows circle above the wreckage of tanks and trucks, their cries thin and distant in the vast emptiness. Rommel's command car halts on a low rise overlooking the front. He steps out slowly, boots crunching on spent shell casings. Around him, the Afrika Korps is unrecognizable. Trucks without tires, tanks without turrets, soldiers hollow-eyed and silent. The proud steel spearhead of the Wehrmacht has become a battered skeleton. Bayerlin approaches with a clipboard, his uniform torn and stained. Reports from last night's engagements, he says grimly. The British have breached between the 164th Light Division and the Trento. They're pushing armor through the gap. Rommel doesn't take the paper. He already knows what it says. The defenses are fracturing. His men are fighting with bayonets and grenades against tanks. Even the Italian artillery crews, once dismissed by the Germans, are firing to the last shell. Send word to the 15th Panzer, Rommel says. Counterattack immediately. We can't let them widen the breach. Sir, Bayerlin hesitates. The 15th has maybe 15 operational tanks left. Rommel turns sharply. His blue-gray eyes flash with something between fury and despair. Then they will use all 15. At the front, Sergeant Witzel and his men dig into the sand behind a broken ridge. The sound of engines grows louder. British Shermans, a dozen at least. He checks his MG-34 and glances to his right. Corporal Menz has set up a Panzerbuchse 39 anti-tank rifle. Obsolete, but all they have left. Wait for them, Witzel mutters, sweat running down his neck. The sand vibrates as the tanks draw closer, their shadows looming through the haze. When the first one crests the ridge, Menz fires. The bullet sparks harmlessly off the Sherman's armor. The tank's turret turns slowly toward them. Run! Witzel shouts, diving into a shell hole as the machine gun opens up. The air fills with hot lead, sand exploding around them. Witzel returns fire in short, desperate bursts, watching tracer rounds bounce off steel. One of the Shermans burns briefly, hit by an 88 somewhere behind them, but the others keep advancing. Back at headquarters, the radio crackles with confusion. Voices blur together. Please for ammunition, coordinates shouted. Silence where voices should be. Rommel leans over the map, tracing a finger across the front. The British have begun Operation Supercharge, a renewed push aimed directly at the center of his line. Colonel Westphal bursts in. Field Marshal, the Italians at Tel el-Kakir are collapsing. The British armor will be through by nightfall. Rommel doesn't look up. And Berlin? He asks quietly. Westphal hesitates. We've requested resupply. The answer was vague. Rommel's voice turns cold. Vague. He walks out into the morning light, his boots kicking up dust. Around him, men rush to and fro. Medics carrying stretchers, drivers refueling trucks with the last precious drops. He spots a group of soldiers repairing an 80mm gun, their hands blistered, faces gray with exhaustion. They still salute as he passes. He stops. Hold your fire until you see their hulls, he tells them. Every round must count. The youngest gunner, barely 18, nods. Jawohl, Herr Feldmarschall. When the next wave of British tanks comes, those gunners do exactly as he said. They wait until the enemy is within 500 meters, then unleash hell. The first two tanks explode, black smoke rising like pillars into the sky. The third keeps coming, treads grinding over the corpses of the fallen. The 88 fires again, another kill, but then the gun jams. The crew scrambles, cursing, until a shell hits their position. When the smoke clears, nothing remains but twisted steel. Rommel watches it from the ridge. His jaw tightens, but he doesn't look away. These are his men, his sons, the Afrika Korps dying by inches. By noon, he can no longer ignore the inevitable. The line is broken. Communications between divisions are gone. Units fight isolated, unaware of what's happening to their flanks. The British advance is relentless. Columns of armor moving west, infantry close behind, supported by overwhelming artillery. Rommel returns to his tent briefly, sinking onto a folding chair. His face is drawn, his eyes bloodshot. He removes his cap and wipes his forehead with a trembling hand. For a moment, the great desert fox looks simply human, tired, defeated, and very much alone. He whispers to no one. If only Berlin had sent the fuel. If only, but wishes mean nothing here. The desert takes everything. That evening, as the sun sinks low and turns the dunes to blood-red waves, Rommel gathers his senior officers. "We will hold until the last possible moment," he tells them quietly. "Then we will withdraw in good order. There is no shame in survival, only in surrender." Berlin nods slowly. "And if the men can't move? If there's no fuel left?" Rommel's eyes darken. "Then we abandon the machines. But we do not abandon each other." Outside, the horizon flashes again with artillery fire. The desert seems to pulse like a dying heart. Rommel steps out of the tent and looks east one last time, where the British guns thunder ceaselessly through the night. For the first time, he feels the truth settle deep in his chest. El Alamein is lost. October 27, 1942, west of El Alamein, Egypt. The wind howls across the endless dunes, carrying with it the distant rumble of tanks. The Afrika Korps, once Rommel's spear of lightning, moves westward in a broken, dust-choked column. Trucks overloaded with men and supplies crawl forward. Some carry the wounded, others tow crippled guns or tanks that sputter and die every few miles. Rommel stands in an open staff car, one gloved hand gripping the windshield frame. His face is pale under the desert sun, his uniform stiff with sand. He's been ill for days. Intestinal infection, exhaustion, no food, but refuses to stop. The car bounces over ruts, the horizon trembling with heat. Behind him, the desert is alive with fire. The British advance has become a tide. Shermans, Grants, Crusaders rolling forward under a sky blackened by smoke. Spitfires circle overhead, strafing any movement on the open ground. Rommel's driver, Sergeant Kaufmann, shouts over the engine, "We can't hold them anymore, Herr Feldmarschall. We have to get to Fuka." Rommel doesn't answer. His gaze is fixed eastward toward the faint, flickering glow where El Alamein once stood, a graveyard of men and machines. The retreat has no order now. Convoys scatter as British aircraft dive from the clouds. Bombs blossom in the sand, flipping trucks, setting fuel cans ablaze. Rommel's car swerves around burning wreckage, men waving frantically from the roadside. He orders the driver to stop. A wounded officer limps forward, his arm bandaged, uniform torn. "Herr Feldmarschall," he rasps, "my men half dead. What are your orders?" Rommel climbs down, looking him in the eye. "Keep moving west. Don't stop until you find water. The British are close behind." The man nods, salutes weakly, and stumbles back to his men. Berlin catches up in another vehicle, dust caked on his face. "Field Marshal, if we don't get fuel by tonight, the column will stop." Rommel nods. "Then we leave what we must. Destroy everything else." All along the line, mechanics drain the last fuel from wrecked vehicles into jerry cans. Those too damaged to move are rigged with explosives. At sunset, 100 black plumes rise across the horizon as the Afrika Korps burns its own armor to deny it to the enemy. Rommel watches in silence, his expression unreadable. The flames paint his face orange, shadows dancing in his eyes. For a moment, he looks like a figure carved from the desert itself, ancient, unyielding, tragic. That night, the retreat halts near a small oasis west of Fuka. The surviving men gather around dying campfires, too tired to eat. They drink from canteens filled with muddy water and stare silently at the stars. The officers hold a meeting under a tattered canvas. Colonel Westphal spreads a map on the sand. "The British are advancing faster than we can withdraw. Their supply lines are intact. Ours gone." Rommel sits apart, hunched forward, his cap in his hands. "We can't fight the desert and the British at the same time," he says quietly. "We'll fall back to Mersa Matruh. From there, perhaps Libya if the fuel lasts." Westphal hesitates. "And Berlin? Do we have orders?" Rommel looks up sharply. "Berlin doesn't understand this war," he says flatly. "They send commands from 1,000 miles away while we bleed into the sand. The desert decides now, not them." Silence follows. Outside, the wind moans across the dunes. At dawn, the retreat continues. The column snakes westward like a trail of ghosts. Rommel's car leads the way, weaving past wrecks and corpses half buried by the sand. Occasionally, a man collapses beside the road, too weak to go on. No one can stop for him. There's no time. Rommel watches every face they pass, German, Italian, sometimes even local Arabs pressed into service. He knows many of these men by name. He's eaten with them, led them through battles that once felt unstoppable. Now, all he can offer is a nod, a brief word, a hand raised in silent respect. Near midday, A British patrol plane spots the column. Moments later, bombs fall from the sky. The desert erupts. Trucks overturn, men scatter. Rommel's car slides sideways into a ditch. He climbs out coughing, waving off aides who rush to help. "I'm fine," he snaps, but his voice cracks. He looks to the west where the road vanishes into shimmering heat. Beyond that, Libya, Benghazi, perhaps Tunisia. Each name feels further away, more like a prayer than a destination. As the smoke clears, Rommel surveys the chaos around him, the wounded, the burning vehicles, the endless stretch of empty desert. He knows the truth. This isn't a retreat anymore. It's an escape still he refuses to break. "We keep moving," he says quietly. "No matter what happens, we keep moving." He turns back to his driver. "Kaufman, start the engine." The car sputters, groans, then comes to life. Rommel climbs back in, settling into his seat as the convoy lurches forward once more. Behind him, the sands of El Alamein fade into the horizon. Ahead, only uncertainty, but deep down Rommel knows. The desert war, the great gamble of North Africa, is finished. October 28, 1942, late afternoon. The dunes west of El Alamein. Rommel sits alone on a ridge, watching the sun burn low across the desert horizon. The remnants of the Afrika Korps crawl past him, a trail of men and machinery reduced to skeletal form. Dust swirls in the dry wind, catching in his hair and the edges of his uniform. Somewhere in the distance, the faint thunder of British guns echoes, a reminder that the Eighth Army is relentless. Still advancing, the desert is silent here, save for the moaning wind and the distant metallic screech of a tank's final treads. Rommel rises and steps onto the crest, letting the vastness of the sands stretch before him. He takes a deep breath, inhaling the dry, hot air that carries the scent of spent gunpowder and scorched earth. The dunes ripple endlessly, like waves frozen in time, indifferent to the suffering below. He thinks of all that has been lost: men, tanks, pride, the illusions of victory that once seemed so close. The Afrika Korps, his creation, his pride, has been shattered. Supply lines choked, reinforcements impossible, every maneuver anticipated and countered by Montgomery's meticulous planning. The Desert Fox, the commander who had once danced across North Africa with audacity and speed, is now a man stripped to the bones of reality. A young soldier approaches, dragging a wheelless truck behind him. "Herr Field Marshal, sir." Rommel doesn't turn immediately. When he does, the boy's eyes are wide, filled with a mix of fear and awe. "Sir," the boy stammers, "what do we do now?" Rommel looks at him, and for a moment the mask of the commander falls away. He sees fatigue, hopelessness, but also courage, the stubbornness of men who refuse to quit even when the world has abandoned them. "We survive," Rommel says simply. "We move, we live to fight another day. That is all we can do." The boy nods and trudges off, leaving Rommel alone again. He surveys the sand once more, imagining the ghostly figures of the men who will not make it to the next oasis, the next convoy, the next defensive line. He thinks of Tobruk, of Gazala, of victories that now feel like distant echoes. Rommel kneels briefly in the sand, feeling the heat seep through his gloves, pressing against the lines of his face. He looks west toward the road to Fuka and Mersa Matruh, the only paths that remain. Behind him stretches the battlefield of El Alamein, a scar across the desert, a monument to what has been lost. In that moment, Rommel allows himself a rare acknowledgement of truth. The desert war is over, not in rumor or reports, but in the bones and eyes of every soldier left alive. The tide has turned irrevocably. The Afrika Korps cannot hold North Africa. The illusions of lightning victories, of bold maneuvers, have been ground away by attrition, supply shortages, and the relentless precision of the British Eighth Army. He rises again, shoulders squared, and climbs back into his command car. Behind him, the sun dips toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the dunes. The desert is quiet now, waiting for the survivors to vanish into its endless waves, waiting for the next chapter that will come with the unforgiving clarity of history. Rommel looks forward, his eyes narrowing against the glare. There is no glory left here, no theater for clever tactics, no room for the audacious maneuvers that once defined him. Only survival, only retreat, only the grim acknowledgement that sometimes even a fox, cunning and relentless, can be cornered. He grips the wheel and moves the car forward. The men follow. The dunes stretch before them, empty and eternal. And in the silence between the desert wind and the last distant gunfire, Rommel knows the truth. The North African campaign. The war across the sand is over. For a moment, the desert seems to hold its breath. Then it swallows the last traces of the Afrika Korps and continues on, indifferent, eternal. Rommel stands on the dunes of El Alamein. He knew the desert war was over.